Good afternoon, class. Well, yesterday we identified what real numbers were and some properties that dealt with real numbers. Today we're going to be reviewing adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. So we're going to do 1 6 and 1 7. Before we start talking about adding and subtracting real numbers, we should just deal with some whole numbers. If we want to find the difference of two things, that would be to subtract them, so that goes back to some operations that we have to identify. So 20 minus 15 is just going to be 5. So we would be subtracting these two for asking for a difference. Sum is to add, so we're going to take 38 and add 19 to get 57. So sum is to add. So that's just a review. We're going to be doing some real numbers, so whole numbers are real numbers, but we're going to be dealing with fractions and decimals today as well. Now we have to understand what an inverse is. An inverse is just the opposite or reverse of something. So if I'm dealing with two numbers, -5 and 5, they are inverses or opposites of each other. So we're going to be dealing with some of that today. Additive inverses have a sum of 0. So if we add two things that are opposites of each other, we just get 0. So the additive inverse of each number, so in this case, -7 is the additive inverse of 7. It's the opposite of it. -3, the opposite is 3. -11, the opposite of 11. And 9, the opposite of is -9. So let's talk about absolute value. You're going to be dealing with absolute values. And when we take the absolute value of something, we're just basically asking for what is the positive of that number. So if it's negative, we're just looking for the positive of it. If it's already positive, we'd leave it that way. So in this case, the absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of -3 is 3, so these are equal. The absolute value of -3 is 3. This one has no simplifying, so those are equal. -3, no absolute value, but that is 3, so therefore -3 is less than the absolute value of -3. Absolute value of 3 is 3. And if we're comparing that to -3, we'd say that 3 is greater than -3. So absolute value is dealing with taking the sign and just making it positive. To add real numbers, this is a key concept. This is something that you can have on your key concept sheet, this up here. To add two numbers with the same sign, you just add their absolute value. So you add them up and then just keep the sign the same. So I have the same sign. To add two numbers with different signs, it's a little bit different. We're going to actually subtract their absolute value, so subtract the two numbers, and then the sum has the same sign as the added number with the greatest absolute value. So whichever number has the largest number is going to determine your sign. So we'll do some examples, see if that makes sense. So if we're going to take -16 and add -8, we're really just looking at adding 16 and 8, which is 24, but just remember we wanted our sign to stay the same, so it's -24. -11 and 9, since these are different signs, we're really looking to subtract the two, so we get 2, but -11 has a larger absolute value, so our sign will be -2. So since these are different signs, we subtract them, largest minus the smallest, get 2, and then realize that our sign needs to be -2. 9 plus a -11, well, that's the same thing as the problem we just did. We would subtract the 2 to get 2. It's different signs, we're going to subtract them. And since -11 is larger, our answer is -2. So these two problems really were the same thing, because the commutative property allows us to add things in different orders. That's what we learned in the last lesson. If we're subtracting two real numbers, that's nothing more than rewriting it as the opposite, adding its opposite. So a minus b is the same thing as a plus a -b. Something we should point out here is anytime there is a minus and a negative next to each other, we just rewrite that as plus. So negative and minus become plus, always. So if we're doing -7 minus 2, we would just rewrite that as -7 plus a -2 to get -9. Over here, we're taking 8.2 minus a -2.1 minus a negative just changes to plus, so we get 10.3. So really, subtracting is no different than adding. We just have to change the subtraction to plus and negative. So if we're taking 4.8 minus a negative 8.7, we would rewrite that as 4.8 plus 8.7 to get 13.5. And it'd be positive because we ended up with adding two positive numbers. So we're going to be dealing with those for most of our problems. We're also going to be dealing with fractions, and we'll do some examples of those in class. Multiplying and dividing real numbers. So when we're multiplying and dividing, we have to understand what reciprocal is, and we'll be dealing with reciprocal when we divide. But the reciprocal of two numbers is just to flip it. So A over B has a reciprocal of B over A. The only stipulation is neither one of those two numbers can be 0. So 4 over 5 and 5 over 4 are reciprocals of each other. Negative numbers also have reciprocals. A whole number, let's say we had 5 here. In order to take the reciprocal of that, we have to put that 5 over 1 and flip it. In order to find the reciprocal of a mixed number, we have to change it into an improper. Well, 1.5, we multiply the 2 and the 1 and add 1, we get 3 over 2. Then we take the reciprocal. So we can't take the reciprocal of a mixed number, but we can change it into an improper and then flip it. So then down here, if we're going to identify what is a reciprocal, 3/4 and 4/3 are reciprocals. 1/2 and 2 are reciprocals because that's 2 over 1. -2 would be the reciprocal of -1/2. 1 3/4. Well, we have to rewrite this as 7/4. So 4/7 is the reciprocal. And then -5/3 is -3/5. That's its reciprocal. So you're just flipping. The only criteria you have to remember is if there's no fraction, just put it over 1. If you have a mixed number, you just have to change it to an improper. Multiplying and dividing real numbers. Well, the key thing here is if we have different signs when we're multiplying or dividing, quotient just means to divide, going back to our first lesson. We just get negative answer if they're different signs. If they're the same sign, we get a positive. So if we have two negative numbers, we get a positive number for its result. So down here are some examples. If we're going to take 6 and multiply it by a -15, we're going to get -90. And that's because this is really a positive number. Multiplied by a negative number, we get -90. Here we're multiplying two positive numbers. So we're going to get 12 times 0.02 is going to be 2.4. Here we're multiplying a fraction. First of all, we're taking a negative and multiplying by a positive, so we're going to get a negative. And to multiply fractions, we just multiply the top numbers. 7 times 3, 21, and 10 times 5 is 50. So in this case, we just get a fraction, -21 over 50. To square a negative number is just to multiply that negative number by itself. So -4 times -4. Negative times negative is always going to be positive, so we just get a positive 16. So if we're squaring a negative number, the result is positive. Now we're going to deal with kind of an application problem here. If we're going to divide real numbers, we're going to take and have 5 withdraws. Now, to withdraw something is just to subtract it. We're taking something out. So we're subtracting out equal amounts from your bank account. So the total amount in the bank is 360. I kind of covered it up here, but that's 360. So that's the total amount withdrawn. So 360 is our total amount. We're going to divide that by how many withdrawals we had. So we have 5 withdrawals, and that's up here, 5 withdrawals. And we're just going to figure out what that's equal to. So 360 divided by 5 tells us that we had $72 in withdrawals. So each withdrawal means that we reduced or had a -72 in each account. So that's just how we would apply some real application. And some definitions. Withdraw means to take money out. Last thing we're going to talk about is dividing fractions. In order to divide fractions, we have to take the reciprocal of the second fraction. So A over B divided by C over D. We have to take the reciprocal of C over D, which is D over C, and then multiply. So in this case down here, if we're dividing two fractions, we have to rewrite it as a multiplication and just flip or take the reciprocal of the second number. Now we're taking a negative number times a positive number, so we're going to get a negative. We can multiply this to get 6, so 3 times 2 is 6, and 4 times 5 is 20. Now it's important for you to understand that we can reduce this. We can reduce this down because 2 goes into each one of those twice. Reduce that down, and we get negative 3 over 10. Some of you might have realized that we could have just reduced this here before we multiplied it and got the same answer. Either way, anytime you get a final answer, you should always reduce your fraction down, not a decimal. And that'll be it for today. So we'll be dealing with some adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Make sure you answer the questions after the video, and then we'll have some exercise problems in class.